I'm joined now by Dan Undersander. He's the forage professor emeritus with the University of Wisconsin because, as I understand it, Dan, you have recently retired.
That's correct. From the university, but I'm going to continue working in the profession over the years to come. And in fact, we'll be up in your country sometime in the next month or so.
All right, sounds good. We wouldn't let you get away that easy, that's for sure, because of course when it comes to alfalfa and making quality hay, there's no one else I'd rather have a discussion with about timing, wrapping, all those sorts of good things. And in this segment, I do hope we'll get to discussing fertilizer and proper timing of that. But let's start with, we are, of course, wrapping up first cut here, headed into second cut in some areas. When is the best time for top quality hay?
Generally speaking, for alfalfa, we would like to cut when the alfalfa is at the mid-bud stage or 28 inches tall. Since your region has had some dry conditions, it may flower a bit shorter, so use whichever criteria comes first. The reason we have the height criteria is because the stem is low quality, and the more stem we have, the lower the quality. So again, either 28 inches or mid-bud stage, whichever comes first.
All right. Now, what about a hay preservative? I know that's maybe a loaded question, but should I be planning on using one for all the hay I'm putting up, just some, use it in some situations? What's the rule of thumb there?
Well, I think hay preservatives are most effective if we use them discriminately. If we are going to make a haylage, of course, we don't need a preservative, though we would recommend an inoculum for good fermentation. If we're going to make baleage or wrap them wet in plastic, we don't need a preservative. If the conditions are such that we can get the hay dried down to about 15% moisture, we probably don't need a preservative. However, it is important to recognize that if we're going to put our hay up a little bit wetter in that 18 to 24% moisture range, then a preservative of propionic acid is very worthwhile to keep the hay from molding. The other benefit that a lot of us don't think about is that the wetter we put hay up, the more leaves that we retain in the hay or haylage making process. So if it's too wet to bale dry, using a preservative will help us put up good quality hay. In fact, may actually improve the quality because of greater leaf content.
Right, because it's those such important leaves that carry that protein, right?
Well, that's right. Actually, two things. The leaves are about 26 to 30-some% protein. The stem is about 6%. But also from an energy content, the leaves are about 500 relative forage quality, and the stems are about 70. So there's both more energy and more protein in the leaves.
All right. Now, before I ask about wrapping, set the record straight for me. If I'm going for optimal energy content in my hay, do I cut early in the morning, in the afternoon, or late at night?
That's always a big question that a lot of people argue about back and forth. Some data from the western United States and actually also from Laval in Quebec have shown that cutting in the afternoon can produce a higher quality forage because starch is made during the day and the leaves have more starch late in the afternoon. However, if we don't get it dried down to 60% moisture by nightfall, then whatever we gain in the afternoon, we may lose before we end up baling it. So generally speaking, I would, and I've talked with the people from Quebec, while there is a little bit of a difference, it probably isn't worthwhile changing our practices. And a lot of farmers will mow in the morning and then chop or make hay in the afternoon. So there can be some benefit, but in the eastern half of North America, the benefit is much less than it is in the western half of North America.
All right. I will accept your "it depends" answer.
Yeah, that's right.
All
Well,
right.
having said that, let me just say I did 19 trials of cutting in the morning versus the afternoon. Every time when we cut, there was more starch and higher quality in the afternoon, but only once out of the 19 times did we bale higher quality material.
Interesting.
Right, so you can cut more in the higher quality in the afternoon, but you could lose more overnight, and it oftentimes doesn't make much difference in the eastern half of the United States.
Okay.
And North America, including Canada.
Yes. All right. Now, getting back to wrapping. So I'm making baleage, let's say. I've seen farmers do wrapping in the field. I've seen them haul it to wherever they're going to store it and wrap it. What's the ideal timing of wrapping? How important is it to get that hay wrapped? And should we be moving it and then wrapping it, or does it matter?
Again, there are several answers to your questions, Lindsay. There is a company now that makes a machine that bales and wraps and drops the wrap bales in the field, and there is some advantage to doing that. If you don't have one machine that does both, then generally speaking, it is more efficient to haul the bales to where you're going to store them and wrap them there so that you don't break the plastic in the moving process. If we're going to wrap within 3 or 4 hours, there's not much difference versus immediately versus 3 or 4, but certainly the bales will heat and we'll lose quality if we wait 24 hours or longer to wrap them. So it is important to wrap quickly, but it doesn't have to be done immediately within the hour or two.
All right. So certainly timely wrapping absolutely makes the difference. But if you can't get to it right away, you're still okay. Now, along those lines, though, is when we're looking at, we are talking second cut, but, whether it's first or third, how important is it to stay off that field once regrowth has started? Is there an optimal window for getting hay off the field, getting bales off the field? Are we risking damage if we wait too long and start driving over that field?
Well, yes, and I think many farmers have seen when they've taken 5 to 7 days, maybe got held up by rain to get the windrows off the field. When you do get the hay up, you can see the yellow alfalfa under the windrow, and obviously that's not good. Also, alfalfa has changed. It comes back quicker than it used to, so it is more important today to get the hay off the field quickly than it was 10 or 15 years ago. Recognize that every day after mowing that we drive over the field, we lose 6% yield from next cutting. So if it takes us 3 days to get the hay off the field, that's 18% yield loss from next cutting. 5 days is a 30% yield loss from next cutting. So getting the hay off the field quickly is crucial and much more important than it was 10 or 15 years ago. What we're doing is the alfalfa's coming back, we're driving over the regrowth, we're breaking the stems off, and then that's reducing the yield of the next cutting.
All right. And there's that much of a difference between older varieties and newer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing I might say, this is why fields harvested for silage or baleage yield more than fields harvested for hay, because the traffic occurs sooner after mowing in haylage making than it does in hay making.
Right. Yeah. We put up on our farm. We did haylage in a bag last year for the first time, and I was amazed at how quickly we got across the fields. Harvested that crop. It was in the bag, sealed up, and we were ready to start having it regrow just like that. It took no time at all. It was pretty remarkable. That's for sure.
I think haylage and baleage wrapping is a good process for most farmers with animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
whether beef or dairy.
Well, this year we've had certainly no shortage of dry days, but last year we had in this area anyway, in the Ottawa Valley, we just had rain upon rain upon rain, and it was actually probably the only way we could have got any hay done. And so it's wonderful to have that option. I know not everyone does, but it certainly is a fantastic option when the weather just won't cooperate. That's for sure.
Right.
Right. Now, and this is perhaps one of the ones that the most questions I get about things with hay are always about fertility and fertilizer and when. So, in season, let's forget about manure maybe, unless you really want to cover that. But when is the optimal time to be fertilizing my hay crop for maximum production?
So I always recommend fertilizing 2 times. Many of your farmers will be taking either 3 cuts or a few 4. And what I would recommend first is to consider after third cut of fertilization that would replace the nutrients that you removed during the year. Alfalfa takes off 55 pounds of potash per ton and 5 pounds of sulfur, and so you can calculate how much you need to put on. If you put that on in the fall, the alfalfa will overwinter better, and then you won't need to put fertilizer on before first cutting. I don't like to drive on the fields before first cutting because the ground is usually soft, and then we can leave tracks, we can damage the stand. So an option would be to put a little fertilizer on after first cutting, right now, and then to put on the difference that was removed after the third cutting or fourth cutting of the season, depending. Either one is fine. This will give us good fertility during the year. We want to split the potassium so that we don't have luxury consumption. That's why we do some after first cutting and some after third or fourth. And then we'll have good fertility going into winter, which will enhance winter survival and quickness of regrowth in the spring.
All right. So there you have it. There is still time in the season to get some of that fertility on. If you didn't after first cut, there's still some time and you can always catch up for next year. So thank you, Dan, so much for making time for us today, and happy haying to everybody out there.